Hey everyone, my name is Corel, and today we're going to be taking a look at a new From the Depths tutorial series. So the first thing on our roster is going to be fuel engines. Fuel engines are kind of the core of this From the Depths power system. They're the oldest, longest standing engine type, and they've got a whole lot of options available. So what I'm going to do is take you through each of the components that can compose an engine. Then I'm going to take you through some of the design considerations that go into engines. And finally, we're going to take a look at some tips and tricks on how engine design works and how to make the most of them. So, first things first, the first block of an engine is always your generator. And what this block does is it's the core of the engine. A lot of From the Depths component types have a central block that everything else connects to. It doesn't always have to be the center of the thing that you're building, but in this case, everything relies on a connection to this one block. And if you don't have that connection, then you're not going to get very far when you're constructing things. So generator block is that core block for the engine, and in order to connect things to it, we need to have crankshafts. Crankshafts basically are connectors, and we can put those out in a line in front of our fuel engine, in front of our generator rather. The generator is the core block. The crankshaft connects everything else to that generator. So what do you want to put on there? Well, the first thing that you want to add to a crankshaft is a cylinder in order to get power. A cylinder is a block that generates power. That's pretty much what its purpose in life is. The power that's generated and the efficiency with which it's generated, that is the fuel use per tick, can be modified via various connecting factors and other things surrounding the cylinder, but the cylinder is what generates the power itself. So we can have some cylinders around here, and you can see if I add some fuel storage here. Just going to add a little bit of that there. You can see we now have 40 engine power. Each of these cylinders is going to produce 10 power on its own. So that little bit of power production doesn't seem like much, but it really balloons out of control when you start adding other components in. So the next thing we want to take a look at is fuel injectors. Fuel injectors are the messy, quick and dirty way of getting a lot of power out of a cylinder. If I add a single fuel injector here, you notice that our power down here in the lower right goes up to 420. Now, this is connecting to two of these cylinders. You can see this cylinder features one fuel injector. This cylinder features one fuel injector. And so both of those are taking advantage of this one fuel injector. You don't have to have a 1-to-1 ratio. They can connect to multiple things at once. So that's pretty important to note. So that is adding 400 power in total. If we add a fuel injector to where it's just touching one cylinder, we get 230 power out. Basically, we're getting about 100 power out of a cylinder with a fuel injector attached to it. To confirm that, I can go ahead and remove these other cylinders here. And we are now getting exactly 200 power out of this cylinder. Without the fuel injector, we get 10. With it, we get 200. So what's the downside? Well, fuel injectors consume fuel. A lot of it, and very quickly. They also heat up cylinders very quickly. If you'll note the temperature line there, the cylinder will overheat at 95 degrees Celsius. And when they overheat, they go boom. They don't actually deal physical damage to anything, but they'll take a long time to cool back down, and until they cool down, you're not going to get any power back out of them anytime soon. So, you definitely don't want to overheat your cylinders, and fuel injectors cause a lot of heat for cylinders. So the next component we're going to look at is a radiator. There are small and large radiators. Radiators reduce the efficiency of the engine, that is, they make it consume more fuel than it otherwise would, but they also cool down the cylinders on any attached crankshaft. Radiators can connect pretty much anywhere you want. So they can connect to the end here, they can connect to the sides of the crankshaft. You can see these are connected here. They're connected to the crankshaft here, even though the back's not necessarily touching the crankshaft. They can connect to the cylinders. They can connect, it doesn't look like they can connect to the fuel generator itself. So, or the fuel engine generator. That cools the cylinder back down. So if we have fuel injectors on there heating our cylinders, we can put corresponding radiators to cool the cylinders. So the next block I'm going to have us take a look at, oh yes, the large radiator is also just a regular radiator, but the obvious factor there being that it's much larger and thus cools a lot more and consumes more efficiency to operate. So another thing we can consider is carburetors. Carburetors are similar to fuel injectors. They attach to cylinders. They attach only to cylinders. It doesn't matter if they're touching a crankshaft or not. I can put this up here and it works just fine. So what I'm doing with this is, if you notice the power output in the lower right, it is 100. Obviously we were only getting 10 power out of the cylinder without the carburetor. This gives it 100. The fuel injector gives it 200. So why would we want to use a carburetor instead of a fuel injector? Well, the carburetor allows supercharger and turbocharger attachments, which are incredibly powerful in terms of allowing for greater efficiencies. Therefore, those are great for reducing fuel usage, and they also have some benefits for cooling as well. And I'm going to explain that when we get to the exhaust portion. So for now, carburetors are probably what we're going to focus most on, and I'm going to go ahead and attach several of these. Again, like the fuel injectors, they can connect to multiple cylinders. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up a bunch of these. And now you can see I've got an 800 power engine and just a little flat pancake of a thing. Okay, for simplicity, I'm going to go ahead and carve the rest of that crankshaft off and work with this directly. So the next component we're going to take a look at is the supercharger. The supercharger is a mechanism that connects to a cylinder. If I can rotate that correctly here. And I'll just plop a couple of those there. Supercharger doesn't do anything for our power output. You notice we have 800 power output before and after we add the superchargers. So the superchargers, not going to do anything for power output. They're just there for efficiency. And more specifically, they're just there for fuel efficiency when your engine is not running very much. You'll note in the description here that this allows fuel to be combusted more efficiently at low RPM. What that means is if your engine is actually doing work, the supercharger isn't doing a whole lot for you. It does do something, but not a whole lot. And in order to demonstrate that here, one of the main menus of the engine block, in fact the main menu, is if you hit Q on this engine block here, you'll note that we have this maximum power, we've got fuel use per second here. These are relatively inaccurate numbers until you actually calibrate the engine. So in order to calibrate an engine, what I like to do is to take a shield projector and attach it to whatever I've got the engine on. And I'm just going to turn that all the way up on all three of those parameters and then boost the effect strength. Now obviously there's not enough power on this vehicle to run that shield projector, so it's just going to turn off. But what that's doing over here, and we just heard the pop of those cylinders popping because they're getting too hot. What that's going to do over here is run this engine at full speed constantly as fast as it can. So right now we're seeing 0 power per unit of fuel because we have no working cylinders because they've all popped. That's not good. So I'm going to take that shield projector back off for now, and we'll deal with that later. So back to having a semi-functional engine here, hopefully, once these cylinders cool down. Looks like those are going to take a while without some sort of cool-down mechanism. So in order to get that to happen, I'm going to go over exhaust pipes next. Exhaust pipes are this whole set of pipes over here, and these act pretty much like you'd expect a pipe to act. They take exhaust from a cylinder or a turbocharger, and they consolidate it into the pipe. You can run that around your vehicle, you can point it out of the vehicle, you can combine them. So if I have a pipe coming out here, and let's just go this direction as an example. In fact, I'm going to mirror this here. if I have a pipe coming out here, you'll note that this, if I highlight it, will highlight the two cylinders on the left and right side, not the top and bottom, indicating that the top and bottom cylinders do not have gases or exhaust exiting the pipe from those cylinders. On the other hand, the highlighted ones on the left and right and their carburetors do have exhaust gas leaving there. So what we've got here is a working system in respect to the left and right, and a non-working system with regards to the top and bottom cylinders. You'll also note that the side cylinders are cooling down from their overheat state much faster than the top and bottom cylinders. That's a good thing. That's partially because of this exhaust that we've added here. Alright, so these are now back and operational. And what I'm going to do is also add a mirror line there. Then I'm going to add a 5-way connector here. And now we have an exhaust from all 4 of these cylinders. So this exhaust is coming off all 4 of these cylinders and should be exiting at that open spot there. So one thing that's worth noting about exhaust, you need an exit line that leads all the way out of the vehicle. Turn the mirror line off so this is clear. If you have a exhaust that is going, say, down, like so, you'll note that there's a clear, or you are lacking a clear flow of exhaust out of the vehicle, and therefore cooling is reduced. That basically negates the entire amount of cooling that we get from the exhaust. So the solution to this is to make sure that you always have an exhaust pipe pointing straight out of the vehicle to clear line of sky. Now that means that I can't have, even though it would look like it, this does not point to clear line of sky. It's pointing down towards this wooden block here, which is blocking the exhaust. It's a little bit gamey, but it replicates the necessity of having an exhaust pipe point to open air, which is pretty realistic in the end result, if not in exactly how it's achieved. Alright, so we've got our exhausts. Let's put a shield generator back down. I'm going to do that over here this time. And now you'll notice we've got a bunch of exhaust coming out of here. Now, if we take a look at our cylinders are still heating up, but they're not heating up nearly as quickly as they were before. So you'll see this is actually kind of stabilizing around 55°C, maybe it might go as high as 60 over time. But the temperature is stabilizing and will in fact not overheat with this one exhaust coming off of each cylinder. So that's what exhaust does. It basically just reduces the heat of the cylinder and therefore allows you to run the cylinders with more components attached without blowing up the cylinder. So the next thing we're going to look at is the part where all of the complexity of fuel engines come from. It's these turbochargers. These things are rather complex, and to demonstrate this I'm going to take that shield block back off for now. What these do, a turbocharger effectively connects a cylinder and a carburetor, and it runs exhaust gases out of the cylinder and runs them past the carburetor in an attempt to cool the system as a whole. It will take the exhaust gas from the cylinder, run it up here, the carburetor gets the exhaust gas and can use that to cool the cylinder, and then the turbocharger is now responsible for dispensing the actual gas from that system. So what I've got here is I've got a black side and a white side on the turbocharger, indicated by these rings around it. And then if you look at the model for the turbocharger, we've also got these pipes on the side. Now those pipes on the side are what connect to the cylinder and carburetor. The little crook-shaped pipes on the top and bottom are what would connect to exhaust vents, and more specifically, you're most interested in the one coming off of the black side of the turbocharger. That's where the actual exhaust is going to come out of. And we'll just take a quick test here. Gas is in fact leaving the system through the black side of the turbocharger, and if we want to run gas into the turbocharger, it has to come in through the other side of this black pipe here. So it would have to come in from the cylinder side. Now note, these turbochargers can exist and can connect to other exhaust pipes. So this is actually valid, or would be, if I had a carburetor attached to the top side, this white side of the turbocharger. So what this is doing effectively is adding additional cooling to the whole system, and it's also acting as an exhaust output for the cylinder, which adds even more cooling. So that is very valuable in terms of keeping our cylinders cool. That is critical when you start dealing with larger engines. So what we're going to do here then is take a look at another type of turbocharger, and this type is actually in this exhaust pipes menu. And this type of turbocharger, the black side of it is slightly differently oriented. That's the only difference between the two types of turbocharger. You've got a black side on this one that has the output, or the input rather, from the exhaust being on the side, and this one, the input is on the end, so this pipe here is actually running into it successfully. And if I want to exhaust from here, I can do so like that. Now again, this turbocharger needs to have a carburetor attached to this flared end on the side of the white part of the turbocharger. So without something, or without a carburetor specifically there, this turbocharger is doing nothing. So we have our cylinders, we have our carburetors, we have our turbochargers. Those three things in conjunction form the vast majority of the most powerful and efficient fuel engine designs. You can run with injectors if you have enough cooling on there, but injectors take the spots up that are normally used by carburetors, so by definition adding an injector is going to significantly reduce the amount of cooling you can apply to a cylinder. Another factor that we haven't talked about here is heat. Heat is generated by all of these cylinders here, and I've mentioned it in passing in regards to the cylinders exploding, but it's also a huge factor in terms of the cylinder's efficiency. So the hotter a cylinder gets, the less efficient it's going to get. And in order to demonstrate that here, I'm going to quickly add some simple exhaust pipes. And those will be enough cooling for now. We're going to re-add our shield generator, just to add some load into the system again. Now, if you'll note the power in the bottom right, you'll note that our max power is actually dropping down here. It started out at 800, we are now down to 750, and it's going to keep dropping here as long as the cylinders keep heating up. The hotter those cylinders get, the less engine power we get. If we were to increase cooling on the cylinders, let's say by adding more exhaust, I'm just going to pop that there to make sure that doesn't fall apart on me. So you'll note that we're now back up to 791 power out of this 800 power engine. If we add even more cooling to more of these cylinders, you can see we're claiming more and more power. So we don't want to let the cylinders get too hot because it reduces our efficiency. We also don't want to let the cylinders get too hot because it reduces the amount of power we're actually generating. So the injectors are kind of a double whammy there because we're losing the carburetors, so we're losing the ability to use turbochargers, which increase our efficiency. We're also heating up the cylinders faster, which requires more cooling, so we would either need more radiators to cool the cylinders down better, which these reduce our efficiency, or we would need a ton of other exhausts attached to the cylinders, which again reduces the carburetors, and it's just a compounding scenario where the injectors are effectively reducing your overall engine output and efficiency at pretty much every turn. You can build an injector engine, but the only way to do so involves a lot of cooling attached to your cylinders. And that is just not very efficient in the end. So if I attach some injectors here, we're just going to take a look at this temporarily. You can see we've actually got quite a bit more power, and our cylinders are actually doing all right in terms of temperature. It actually looks like I didn't place those quite correctly. Need the flat sides of both, or of the fuel injectors. You need both flat sides of it connecting to the cylinders in order to connect them. So now we have 2 fuel injectors on each of these cylinders. They're running fairly cool, and we're getting quite a bit of power out of it. But we also have a lot of exhaust on here. If we were to start stripping this exhaust away, we start heating up very quickly and losing power very quickly. And if I actually take away and go down to 1 exhaust pipe per cylinder, which was perfectly fine with the other, again we lose the cylinders there and they start exploding. So I tend to prefer a carburetor and supercharger and turbocharger based engine just because of the kind of compounding effects of the efficiency and heat and their end result on power production. Now the problem with that is that it also greatly increases the size of the engine. That is a common trade-off with things in From the Depths. You can trade size for efficiency. Alright, so here I've loaded in a large engine, and this engine's a very good demonstration for a number of engine principles. This is in fact an extremely efficient engine. If we take a look at the fuel efficiency here, we've got 421 power per unit of fuel. That's one important metric when you're designing an engine that you want to consider, because the power per unit of fuel is going to dictate naturally how much fuel you want to carry on the vehicle. It's also going to dictate in some degree how much space is being taken up. So an engine has an interesting trade-off in that the more space you give the engine, generally the more efficient you can get that engine, but at the same time, the more space you give the engine, the less space you have to use on fuel. So right now I've got a shield projector running this engine at full drive, and if we come back here and take a look at our power, we can see this engine is producing almost 9,000 power, and we're using maybe 5 to 10 fuel per second rather. That is reasonable. It's a very low amount of fuel usage, in fact, for 8,000 power, but that is being generated by this one engine that is just kind of sipping at this fuel block. We've got 2 fuel blocks here for 18,000 fuel, and so if we're consuming, say, 10 fuel a second, that's going to last for 1,800 seconds. That is a total of 30 minutes, if I've done my math correctly. So those 2 tiny little fuel blocks with this gigantic honkin' engine are actually generating quite a lot of power for quite a lot of time. And that's a recurring theme you're going to see in From the Depths. If you increase the size of a thing, you can make that thing more efficient, more powerful, more effective at what it does, but you're also taking up more size, which means you need to spend more resources on the thing, of course, but you also need to spend more resources on armoring because you're armoring a larger area. So there's these constant trade-offs in From the Depths of, yes, I can make this system more powerful, but I'm also going to take up more space every time I do so. So, on to the actual mechanics of this engine. It's using the same parts that we've already looked at, without the fuel injectors, of course. It's just got an engine block here, it's got our crankshaft down the center, if I take a look in the middle here. It's got our cylinders. It is using a part that we haven't covered extensively, that is the adapter. The adapter connects to a crankshaft and lets you place cylinders adjacent to the adapter, so effectively it acts as a crankshaft extension. if I take a look here, I can place a generator, I can place a crankshaft down, I can place an adapter, and then I can put up to, in this case, 5 cylinders connected to this adapter. And it's a way of adding some additional cylinders into our engine Tetris there. So that is the basis of this entire engine. It's just those parts we've already looked at. What it's doing here that's special is it is putting as many cylinders as possible adjacent to as many carburetors as possible. So you'll see here this particular carburetor is connected to 3 cylinders on the front, on the right side, and on the bottom. And down here we can see this cylinder, for example, is connected to an adapter here at the bottom. Let's pick an easier one to see. Let's go up to the top of the structure, and let's pick, let's say this cylinder right here. We have a carburetor here, we've got a carburetor here, and we've got a carburetor here that it's connected to, as well as the crankshaft on the bottom side. So you can see what they're trying to do here. They're trying to create the most tightly packed array possible of cylinders touching carburetors. And then on top of that, we've got kind of this maze of engine exhausts running through turbochargers. And those turbochargers are using the exhaust that's being pumped through them to cool the cylinders via the carburetors that they're attached to. And that is what is keeping this engine from overheating and exploding cylinders. So you'll note in one of the more important things with this design is that there is exactly one exhaust exit port. And you know what that means? All of the exhaust from all the way back at this corner is running all the way through all of these turbochargers. It's running its way and snaking through all of this nonsense to come out down here. So that exhaust is traveling a very long way in order to make its way out of the system, which means the exhaust being produced by the furthest cylinder from that exit point is powering a lot of turbochargers. Again, the more exhaust we pass through a turbocharger, the more efficiently that turbocharger is going to cool the attached cylinder. So the cylinders here you can see are at 8C. That's pretty low. There's a couple in here that are at 21C. You'll note that these are at 21, and again, as we get out towards the edges, we're back down to 5 or 8C. The 21C is a little bit into the point where we start losing engine power to temperature losses, but that's not all that hot, honestly. For a cylinder that can go up to 95C, we're losing a very minimal amount of power due to the heat of the cylinder. So this overall is a very efficient engine. This is not my design. It's important to note that. I don't know who originally made this design. If you know, please let me know in the comments, but this is definitely not my design. I would have never have come up with this particular pattern of exhausts and turbochargers. So this is a little out of my league when it comes to engine design. I'm going to put the link to this particular prefab in the video description so y'all can download it and have a look at it and try and tinker with it, come up with something more efficient if you can.